I was on my way to United States to convert Christians into Islam. And I had 30 illegal passports at that time. I was arrested, put in jail in Malaysia. I was a dedicated Muslim. Not only prayed the prayers, but I read the Quran once every 10 days, cover to cover. So I was very dedicated. In my time in jail, one day as I'm praying, a man appears in front of me, normal size, but his being shines like light. And this light was not a normal light. This light carried identity in it. You knew that he's holy and he's just.
It's the Drew Mariani Show on Relevant Radio.
I love this story. He was a former Hezbollah fighter. Right? His name was Afshin, and he was no stranger to violence. He sat down and shared a story on how, he was on his way to the States and he converted from Islam to Christianity. So he was praying. He was a man of his own faith, right? These radical ideologies sometimes. And suddenly a man appeared in front of him, normal size. But I loved what he said. He shone with light. But what was about the light? There was more than just light. He said the light communicated something else. It had a justice to it, right? A holiness to it. It was not a normal light. The light itself carried an identity. What does Scripture tell us, right? Christ is the light, right? We know that. So he knew that he was holy instantly. And even though he had prayed for many prayers, he fasted a lot, he read the Quran, he realized that was the Christ, that was the God of the Christians, right? He's not alone. I met a man in 1989, 87. It was a while ago, very late 80s, and I was in Africa. And somebody said, you have to interview this young boy. His name was Emmanuel Segastasha, and he was a Muslim kid. He wasn't a terrorist, but he was picking beans in a bean field. And Jesus appeared to him. And Jesus taught him things of a higher intellectual and above all, a theological level, well beyond his years of learning. So he converted to Christianity, and he went before the local bishop. The bishop, I had the opportunity to sit down and have dinner with and interview as well. His name was Bishop Gahamani. He was actually killed in the Rwandan genocide. He says to me, he says, Drew, I was so convinced that Christ appeared to this young boy because he had no way to know the things that he knew about theology at the age that he was. Christ came as a man of light. And we hear these stories, right, all over the place. One final story, and I want to bring Professor Rory Showman into the conversation as well. I think we live in I keep saying this, a very special time. Not only do we have the reported visions of the Mother of God appearing all over the planet, every habitable continent, there are reports of the Mother of God coming with an urgent message for the human race to amend its life, to return to God, right? To do penance, to pray, to fast, to grow in holiness. It's the gospel message. But even Jesus Christ is appearing, right? He appeared to St. Faustina. We know that much, right? But he's appearing in our own day and age. During the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, the very beginning of this year, I shared a story with you. I don't know if you remember. It's a fascinating story to me. Speaking of little boys, came out of Turkey. A 5-year-old boy was found alive. He was buried in rubble from that devastating earthquake. This, you die when you don't have food and water, right? You die, especially when you don't have water. After about 3 days, your body shuts down and you die. You can't live without water. You can go a little bit longer without food. This boy was buried under this rubble for over 8 days. No food, no water. And there was a French organization called SOS Christians. They tweeted out when they rescued this boy that a 5-year-old boy had been rescued after 192 hours spent under rubble. And they asked him, how did you survive? What happened? He said that a person dressed in white would come to him every day and feed him. He would bring him water, and then he would disappear. I don't know about you. That sounds like an angel. It sounds like maybe Jesus himself showed up, right? This boy must have a very important mission in life. That 5-year-old stuck in rubble for 8 days, there's no way he should be able to survive. So what do we know? What's going on? How do we make sense of all of this? I've invited Roy Shulman, who's been with us over the past, talking about everything from the Eucharist to his own conversion story. He went from Judaism to Catholicism. He's an adjunct professor of theology at Ave Maria University and at Holy Apostle Seminary. And he's got a fascinating story to share himself. But he's got perspective on this, on these reported visitations of Jesus and so much more. Professor Shulman, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for the invite. I'm happy to be here.
I love these stories. As I said, a couple decades ago, I was first introduced to these reported visions of Christ. I knew there was a proved apparition in Rwanda, Africa. But to hear about these testimonies of so many claiming to have experiences in 2019, there was a Protestant journal that reported about 600 Muslims converted to Christianity. 150 of them had seen Jesus in a vision, a mass apparition of him. So pretty amazing stuff. What are you hearing? What do you know of this? And what does it say about these times?
Well, first of all, I think the bottom line about what it fundamentally says is it's all real. It's all real. I mean, in other words, all of the things that are presented in the Catholic faith that sound like too outlandish to really be real, and we're very practical, and we sort of on one hand accept them with part of our being, and on the other hand kind of think, well, this can't really happen. Well, they do, and it's all real. And you've got hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people to whom Jesus appeared or Mary appeared, and they not only change their lives, but in many cases change their lives at the cost of their lives or at the risk of their lives, like these Muslims who I just read a recent Ignatius Press book, The Price to Pay, a Iraqi, like from a aristocratic family to whom Jesus appeared, and his family then spent the next 2 years trying to have him killed. So it's real. So that's my bottom line. And of course, and people who have heard my witness testimony know that, I received the great gift of myself finding out it's all real when I didn't think it was real. So everything else, I forgot the other parts of your question.
Let me do this too. I want to open the phones too. Maybe you've heard of experiences like this. Maybe you yourself have converted. The number to get in to join Professor Shulman and myself is 888-914-9149, 888-914-9149. The other part of my question, I was just simply asking, what does it say about the times in which we are living? We have this proliferation of reported apparitions of the Mother of God, but we even have Jesus himself coming. He came in the 30s to Faustina. We have this beautiful devotion. But today, more than ever, in places, especially with Islam, we're having a lot of these encounters with Christ.
Yeah, there was a sheikh, Libyan sheikh, who rather scandalously said that 6 million Muslims a year were converting to Christianity. And I do think it's kind of unprecedented, and I do think it's a sign of the times. And I don't know whether it's because of the particularly dire times we're in. We know that from Scripture and from mostly from Scripture, from Romans 11, that there will be miraculous mass conversion when, quote, the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. For instance, what that means, among other things, is that when the gospel has spread completely throughout the, quote unquote Christian world, then there'll be a wave of conversion of non-Christians to Christianity. And I think one way or another, that's what we're seeing among Jews and among Muslims, what it means with where we are in salvation history. I don't want to sound too weird, but it sounds to me, or feels to me, like, well, we know other things, right, about the time of the second coming. We know it's dogmatic that the second coming will be preceded by a widespread falling away from the faith. And you know better than I the statistics about, how many what the percentage of practicing Catholics are in Europe or the United States, compared to 50 years ago or 100 years ago. It certainly looks like there's a widespread falling away from the faith. So I think it all somehow weaves together in God's plan.
Yeah, and I don't think it's weird. I do think we live in special times. There was a woman who's now a servant of God down in Venezuela who talked about Christ returning, and how he would knock on the door of everyone's heart, and how he comes. I'm not quite how she saw that out of Rwanda, Africa. Part of the message dealt with the return of Christ. And those are things you think, that's so far off. That's millennia from now, right? But there's a generation that will have to encounter that. That could be our generation. Of course, the Divine Mercy Devotion. Father Serafin Mikolenko, who was the vice postulator for the cause of St. Faustina, an expert, he was the one who said to me, that's really what this devotion is about. And if you look at some of the messages, he says, before I come as a just judge, I first come as a merciful Savior. But woe to those of you who do not recognize this time of my visitation. So it just gives me pause, when I see this type of stuff, and I wonder where we are. Why is that we think so often, Professor, that the second coming of Christ is millennia from now? The second coming of Christ for me might be on my drive home today. Who knows? You might die in a car accident. You never know when you're going to encounter the Lord, right? Give me your perspective on that.
Well, St. Faustina is a good example, because at one point she asked Jesus, how can you be so merciful? I don't understand. How can you be merciful? And he said, now is the time for my mercy. Soon is coming the time of my judgment. Here's the quote. It's, speak to the world about my mercy. Let all mankind recognize my unfathomable mercy. It is a sign for the end times. After it will come the day of justice. While there is still time, let them have recourse to the fount of my mercy. He also said to her, you will prepare the world for my final coming. So it is, if you take that seriously, it certainly is a strong suggestion of, things are wrapping up.
Well, it ties into what we're now seeing, too. When you've got mass conversions on the part of Muslims, I think that's pretty profound. 600. What was the number you threw out? That was a giant number.
Well, it was 6 million a year. It was Sheikh Ahmad al-Qahtani, and he got in a little trouble for saying that. I think it wasn't very politically correct in the Islamic world, but that's what he said.
No, I believe you, because I've been following this story for quite a while. Several publications were reporting. They did interviews with these ex-Muslims, and they found that over a quarter of the people they interviewed confirmed that they either had very real dreams or they had visions. And why they're dreaming about this, and why they're communicating, why they're having these encounters. But those visions, those encounters with Christ played a huge role in their conversion. And some of these people didn't even know who this man in white was at first, and that kind of opened the door to trying to figure out, what was going on. Why do you think God would be, acting in this way at this time? It's interesting that, many converts are becoming, unfortunately, evangelicals, maybe even, Protestants, as opposed to Catholics. Is that a commentary or lack of evangelization, or what is it? And I don't know what Christ is saying in these visions. I would hope he'd encourage them to become Catholic, but give me your insight on that. I always found that curious.
Well, I hate to say this. I can give you some anecdotes from my own conversion.
Yeah, please.
There's a problem, which is the Catholic Church very rightly wants good relations with other faith communities. The best way to ruin relations with other faith communities is to be seen as poaching on them and converting, Muslims to Christianity or Jews to Christianity. I don't want to scandalize anybody, but when I was going through my conversion, I spoke to a Carmelite abbot about wanting to be baptized. And what he said to me literally is, there's no reason for you to be baptized. All God wants is for you to be a good Jew. Now, I'm not saying that's universal, but there's definitely too much of that, too much shying away from allowing non-Christians to become Catholic because, they don't want to make trouble and they don't want to, get a black mark. I know, I work with a lot of Jews who are interested in becoming Christian, including Catholic. And I know a man outside of Tel Aviv who went to the local pastor. He was totally convinced of the truth of Catholicism, and he wanted to become a Catholic. And, the pastor literally said to him, come back in 5 years, because he didn't want trouble. The Muslim whose witness testimony is in that book, or is that book, The Price to Pay, he was in Iraq, and he went, actually, this is a little bit different, but still along the same lines. He went to the Catholic pastor in his town and asked to be baptized. And the pastor said, we have 600 parishioners here, and it's okay for you to accept martyrdom, but I'm not, it's not for me to condemn all of them to martyrdom. And that's what would happen if the Muslim authorities found out that we had accepted a Muslim into the church.
Wow.
So I think that because of the stature of the Catholic Church, and because of its universality, and because of its, in some sense, central authority, they're in a particularly delicate position about antagonizing the rest of the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. But it's part of our mission, right? We're to go out to make disciples of all nations. That's part of what we have to do.
I noticed. Yeah, that's right.
That's
right. I think, well, boy, another personal anecdote is I was invited to speak at a Catholic conference in a diocese that I won't name, and I encouraged people to pray for the conversion of the Jews, and I talked about how much the Jews need Jesus also. Yeah. And I was informed by the bishop of that diocese, or actually he informed the diocese, that I wasn't allowed to speak in the diocese under any Catholic auspices afterwards.
Wow.
Because the rabbis had gone to him and complained, how dare you let this man say that Jews need Jesus? I mean, that's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. We need to pray in a particular way for that bishop and for all those who have that mistaken mindset, because that's really what it is. It's really quite tragic. Why don't we do this? I didn't intend to do this, but why don't you share a little bit of your story, if you could? You went from Judaism to Catholicism. I know you have a book on that. In fact, you wrote several books, but share with us a little bit of your background, if you could.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised Jewish. My whole world is Jewish. My parents were Holocaust refugees, so that, made them particularly insular in some sense. And all my world was Jewish growing up. I went to Jewish religious education all the way from the beginning of school until I left for university. I went to MIT. Actually, at university, I basically was propagandized into thinking that you're not allowed to believe in God. It's just a superstition, and it's somehow unscientific and illegitimate to take God, to believe in God. Science is really, has all the answers. So when I got out of university, the best way to put it is I thought I wasn't allowed to believe in God anymore. Right. So I was an atheist. And I went on to Harvard Business School. I was invited to join the faculty. I was a professor of marketing at Harvard Business School. And I was really depressed because life had no meaning. I had always hoped there was a God, and I had always imagined that relationship with God would give my life meaning. But, I had given up on that. I was successful, but that didn't give my life any meaning. So I got very depressed. And in that, I was walking in nature one morning, and I had the extraordinary grace of the veil between the physical world and the spiritual world disappearing. And I could see into the spiritual world, but really the main part of this experience was that I found myself in a intimate communication, kind of communion with God, in this deep communication, and seeing my life as though I had died and was looking back over my life after death in the presence of God. And I saw my life as I would see it after I died, and I understood everything in that experience. I understood that we live forever. I understood that every action has a moral content that's weighed in the balance and recorded for all eternity. I understood that absolutely everything that had ever happened to me had been arranged by this all-knowing, all-loving God. I understood that every time we take advantage of an opportunity, do something of value in the eyes of heaven, we will be rewarded for all eternity. And all of these things are basic truths of the Catholic faith, but I didn't know any of them coming from Judaism. But the biggest part of this experience by far was coming into the deep experience that God himself, the God who not only created everything in the world, but actually created existence, not only knew me by name, not only had been arranging everything in my life to be the most perfect thing, but loved me, cared about me, had been watching over me, had been doting on me as though I were the only creature I had ever created, and as though, in a very real way, everything that made me happy made him happy, and everything that made me sad made him sad. And this just totally, as they say, rocked my world. It turned everything upside down. I knew there was never any reason to be anxious about anything. I knew that nothing could be sillier than worrying about not being loved when we're held in this ocean of love greater than we could ever imagine exists, coming from this all-knowing, all-loving God. There's never any reason to be anxious about anything because everything is being arranged by this God who is all-powerful and loves you more than you love yourself. So totally transformed my world. I knew the meaning of my life was to worship and serve him properly. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what religion to follow. So I very literally prayed at the time, let me know your name so I know what religion to follow to worship and serve you properly. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Krishna and I have to become Hindu. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan, as long as you're not Christ and I have to become Christian. I very literally prayed that. I obviously had a chip on my shoulder, let's say, about Christianity, to say the least.
Yeah.
But I went back home after that experience, and every night before going to sleep, I would pray to know what the name, who this God was who revealed himself to me. And a year after that first experience, I went to sleep, and I had a very vivid experience while I slept of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I was brought into her presence. She offered to answer any questions I might have for her. I asked her about 6 or 7 questions, which she graciously answered. I was, needless to say, overwhelmed by her beauty, and I was overwhelmed by her love, and I was overwhelmed by her grandeur. I don't know how else to put it, right. But just overwhelmed by how exalted and she was. And the next morning when I woke up, I knew it had been Christ in that first experience, and I knew I wanted to become as Christian as possible. And because I knew who the Blessed Virgin Mary was and actually was hopelessly in love with her, as a matter of fact, the first thought I had when I woke up the next morning was, oh boy, I can't wait to go to sleep again tonight and see her again. Of course, that didn't happen. But anyway, that led me pretty straight into the Catholic Church after that experience of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And also, I've got to say, the only disadvantage of being born and raised a Catholic, boy, and now I'm really preaching, but is that you don't know what you have, and you don't know that no one else has it. As a Jew, I would have told a Catholic, well, I have what you have. I have as good a relationship with God as you have, or I actually would have said I have a better relationship with God and I know more about God and everything. Mm-hmm. Everyone says that, but nobody knows the truths in the penny catechism except Catholics, and they're all true. Mm-hmm. I mean, we get given so much on a silver platter as Catholics that we're blind to it, and we think everyone has it, and they don't.
It's so true. It is so true. I love what you say. They say converts make the best Catholics. They really do. We take our faith for granted. It's why I'm so grateful for Relevant Radio and what it's doing. Like, I went through elementary school was all Catholic. My high school was all Catholic. I mean, we're exposed to our faith, and we don't know it. People don't know how to pray the rosary. They don't understand the basic teachings of the faith. They don't believe in the true presence. That's why we have the problem that we have. And I think we're living in a time where there is a great awakening taking place, a great evangelization. Something is afoot. And I know the Eucharist is going to be central to that. That's why we have this Eucharistic revival. I think that's why we have these Marian apparitions being reported. I think that's why Divine Mercy is spreading like it has, one of the fastest grassroots movements in the history of the church. And that's why these accounts of so many people are encountering both the Blessed Mother and Jesus, like yourself. I mean, your story is such a powerful one. When we come back, I need to take a pause, Professor. Let's pick it up. We'll talk a little bit more. A lot I want to get into today, and I'll open the phones. If you want to join us, the number's 888-914-9149. Feel free. If you're thinking about coming into the faith, you want to talk to Professor Shulman about it. If you're a Jew who's listening, we'd love to hear from you. If you've encountered Christ, like the professor has, feel free to give us a call. I also want to deal with the rise of anti-Semitism we're seeing in our country? And what about the prophetic? What does Scripture tell us? And what about the events now unfolding in the Middle East? There's a lot to get into. We'll dive into that and more right after this.
I knew, even though I have kept all the rules and regulation of Islam, I knew I'm not just and I'm not holy. And I knew the only just thing for him to do is to kill me. But I didn't want to die, so I ran to the corner of the room, literally held my head in my arms and just cried out, shouting, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." And I didn't think he will forgive me, because he is just, till I felt a touch on my left shoulder. And he said, "I forgive you." And I felt a weight just lifted off me.
It's the Drew Mariani Show on Relevant Radio.
That was a former Hezbollah fighter, now a ministry leader, who recalled his recent encounter with Jesus Christ. And he said that God did not design us to hate. Did not design us to hate. One day he was praying and Jesus appeared before him in a brilliant, shining light. The light was not a normal light. It carried, he said, an identity. It carried justice and it carried truth. He converted to Catholicism, as did my guest today, Roy Schoeman. And it is a delight to talk with Professor Schoeman. He's a very gifted speaker, a professor known for his work in Catholic theology and conversion from Judaism to Catholicism. He had an encounter with the Mother of God that was profound, very much, like some of the great conversion stories you hear of some of these many saints. He wrote a book. It's called Salvation is from the Jews, in which he explores the Jewish roots of Christianity and his own personal faith journey. So if you want a good read, pick that up, okay? Salvation is from the Jews. It will inspire you. He was born to a Jewish family and, followed the Jewish faith. And yet God has a mission for him. And he reached out. And his conversion story is profound. He's now helping others down the pathway to truth. He runs a website called salvationisfromthejews.com. So you can check that out. You get more information about him, his talks, his events, his books. And he also has a YouTube channel as well. Maggie, did we get the YouTube channel? Can you open your mic? Wait, it is, see if I can find it. Jewish Catholic, you said? I don't see it here in my stack. I'm sorry, Mag. Can you open your mic? Do you mind? Thanks.
It's Jewish Catholic, one word, in YouTube.
In YouTube. Okay, thanks, Meg. I'm sorry. My stack got set off here. Anyway, you can check him out there, and I would encourage you to do so. We'll take your calls, too. If you want to join us, 888-914-9149. If you missed part of the conversation, I would strongly encourage you to check out the podcast. We talked about how accounts are multiplying of Muslims who are encountering Christ, not only in unusual dreams, but in divine encounters. Some are reporting as many as millions, 6 million have converted as a result of this. And there are accounts in Turkey where there are miraculous stories, healings. There are stories in Iraq, in the Philippines, all over. And those accounts are multiplying, and they come from well-sourced, incredible reporters. Professor Schoeman, it is good to have you back with us. I'm so grateful for your time. Let's go to the phones. We'll grab a call or two for you if we could. Okay. And we'll start in Fremont, California. The number to get in, 888-914-9149. Susan, hi, you're on the air with Professor Schoeman.
Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my call. My daughter is 23, and she prays to God, but she doesn't seem to get much consolation. It's hard for her to. She seems to have a little bit of a struggle with feeling that God is a loving God.
Okay.
And I just wondered if Dr. Schoeman had any advice.
All right, good. Good question.
Well, first of all, remember St. Augustine and his mother, St. Monica. So and remember, you're her mother. So your prayers are absolutely instrumental. Other than that, I really think there's a famous Saint, Charles de Foucault, who was a fallen away Catholic, and he had a very disorderly life, and he was very far from believing in God. And his prayer was, God, if you exist, I have to know. And that was enough. And there's a Jewish convert, Rhonda Chervin, who's actually in my collection of Jewish converts book, which is called Honey from the Rock. And she was an atheist Jewess. And her prayer was, God, if you exist, save my soul if I have a soul. And that was enough. So frankly, if your daughter from her heart prayed, God, if you exist and if you love me, I want to know. Or God, please let me know that you exist and that you love me. I don't think you get a much more powerful prayer than that.
Yeah, it's such a great point. Hey, thank you very much for your telephone call. I'm grateful to have it here. Nicholas is in Miami, Florida. Let's bring him in as well. Nicholas, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. I like to thank Professor for being with us tonight and you, Drew. The comment that I want to bring in is that the Jewish people, when they find Christ, they don't become anything else. They become complete Jews. That's what they are, complete Jews. Okay, so that's just and I have your book, Professor, and I have read the first couple of chapters, and I will read the complete book.
Nicholas, thank you. Professor, I'll let you respond. Yeah, your thoughts and comments.
It is true. I mean, I call myself a convert because I don't want to confuse people. But among ourselves, I don't know any Jewish Catholic, or even for that matter, Jewish Christian, who thinks they're a convert. We call ourselves fulfilled Jews or completed Jews. We have come into the truth of Judaism, which is another reason, by the way, to pray for the conversion of the Jews and to evangelize Jews, is they're actually missing the boat on Judaism, if I can say so, because like all the time growing up, I knew we were the chosen people. We're told we're the chosen people. The Old Testament is full of being the chosen people. Chosen for what? And you can't really answer that question. And you can't really, I don't know how to put it, but you can't put any reality behind it until you realize the Jews really are the chosen people. They were chosen for the most important task ever given to any ethnic group, which was to bring about the salvation of all of mankind by hosting the incarnation of God as man, who in Judaism was thought of as the Messiah, and we know was Jesus Christ, the Jewish Messiah. So we really are the chosen people. Everything in Judaism makes perfect sense in the context of the full truth of Christianity. And the full truth of Christianity, if I can say so, is really only in the Catholic Church, since it includes the sacraments. And the meaningfulness even of the Jewish sacramental life is only revealed in the truth of the Catholic sacraments, as you pointed out, the Eucharist, when you mentioned that before. There's everything in Judaism, when you see it in the light of the Catholic faith, it just glows with real meaning and real fulfillment.
Well, thank you so much for your call. I appreciate that. I want to get back to something. Maggie and I were talking during the break. Well, two things. One, a distinction I think is important. Messianic Jew versus a Christian. How do you define those terms? Are they different?
The Messianic Jew is like an umbrella term. And I think that I could legitimately claim some space under that umbrella. A Messianic Jew is a Jew who has come to believe that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. And that's really the only restriction on the term Messianic Jew. So it encompasses Jews who become Protestants or any other form of Christian, but it also includes Jews who come to faith in Jesus the Messiah but don't want to be associated with Christianity. I know that's tragic, but it's true. You saw when I told my witness testimony briefly that I said, as long as you're not Christ, a lot of Jews have a chip on their shoulder about Christianity. And so Jews who do come to faith in Jesus still want to think of themselves as Jewish followers of Jesus, not as Christians. And that's one of the reasons why you have the term Messianic Jew. When you have Messianic Jewish congregations, very often I have a friend who is a Messianic Jew, and I keep slipping and calling him, saying like, well, when you became Christian, and he always, rears up and says, I'm not Christian, So that's another reason for the term Messianic Jew.
So what was the big objection to becoming Christian? I mean, what was why was that such a deal breaker?
From the perspective of a Jew, at least the kind of Jew I was, and remember, I was growing up shortly after the Holocaust. My parents were both escapees from Hitler's Germany. Oh. My mother was an escapee from a train to a concentration camp. And so in the Jewish mental imagery, the Jews have been, hunted and persecuted and chased from place to place for the last 2,000 years. And the reason why they haven't had a peaceful life for those 2,000 years is because there was this false Messiah who appeared 2,000 years ago, and his followers made him out to be the Messiah. And they instituted this religion of Christianity, which painted the Jews as the villains and as the deicides, as the killers of God, and therefore deserving of persecution and being chased out of Christian world and so forth for 2,000 years. I know that's not true. I'm not saying it's true, but that was the mental image that I had. And that was all of Christ. If Christ had not been this fraud who pretended to be the Messiah, the Jews would have had a peaceful life for the last 2,000 years.
Fascinating. My guest, Professor Roy Schoeman. We'll take a few of your calls at 888-914-9149. I know a lot of people are holding and waiting to get to you, but I do want to follow up on another aspect of this, and that is this rise of anti-Semitism that we are seeing in the country right now. I was reporting in the beginning of my show about an event that took place in Russia, where a group of enraged Muslims heard about a flight coming in from Tel Aviv, and they broke through security, and 60 people were ultimately arrested. But it's not just the tarmac in Russia. It's the educational institutions here in America. I think it was, who did I just hear saying that? Trump's son-in-law. I'm zoning out on the name. He just, Kushner. Jared Kushner just came out and said, hey, you'd be safer off in Saudi Arabia than you would be on these school campuses. We see, protests in the streets of America, and we see some real radical stuff happening going on around the world. Is there a rise in anti-Semitism right now globally? Is it just maybe a little spike due to what people are seeing optically happening right now in Palestine? Although if you look at the death count there's people question the proportionality of all this. But I'd like your take on that. There's so much to talk about. Anti-Semitism, I want to start there because I never thought after World War II we would see something like that again.
Well, I cannot answer that question without pointing out the relationship between Islam and the rise in anti-Semitism. One of the things that's different now than 20 or 30 years ago is the number of Muslims in Europe and in the United States. Russia is probably not an example of that, I'm sorry, but whenever you see these anti-Semitic riots, when you see the demonstrations in New York, when you see the campus groups that, are I don't know how to put it, but, actually threatening Jewish students and everything, it's always linked to Muslim organizations, Muslim student organizations, a Muslim population. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them. In a sense, I don't blame them because they're being faithful to Islam. That Muslim man who converted to Christianity that you play those beautiful citations from, was asked by the interviewer, why did you hate the Jews? I mean, he hung people, he killed people. Why did you hate the Jews? And he said, I had never met a Jew. I thought Hitler was a good man for doing what he did. He didn't finish the job. I don't know why I hated them. And he also said, I don't have the quote in front of me, but he said, that he was full of hate. As a Muslim, he was full of hate. And I hate to say it, but Islam teaches hatred of Jews. Muhammad himself said, kill any Jew who falls into your power. He said, according to the Islam, Muhammad was actually killed by a Jewish woman. And on top of that, now I'm getting to the Middle East, but you have another problem going on there, which is that Islam, we have the Great Commission in Christianity, go out and make disciples of all nations. Islam has the Great Commission of subjecting the entire world to Islamic law. That is their Great Commission. Subject them to Islamic law by conversion, ideally, but by force if necessary. And in Muhammad's life, when Muslims talk about miracles performed by Muhammad, the one type of miracle that they can point to is victory in battle. When in a terrorist attack, somebody shouts out Allah Akbar, that's usually translated as God is great, but that's not a correct translation. The correct translation is God is greater. And it is the fact that the terrorist succeeds in whatever he's doing is proof that his God is greater than the victim's God. So there's this equation between victory and violence, let's say, and the truth of Islam. And so it's a tremendously dangerous kind of a toxic mixture.
Professor, hold the thought.
Am I allowed to say that?
I love the candor, love the honesty, and I would agree with you. It's about, we got about 12 minutes before the top of the hour. I need to just take a short pause. When we come back, we'll talk more. I would like to get your sense, too, just from a biblical and historical perspective about what we're seeing today with Israel. And whether or not, in your own opinion, you've had encounters with the Mother of God, you had a profound conversion, if what we're seeing is part of maybe something very prophetic. I'd love to get your take on where we're headed, what we might see. All that and more coming straight up. Stay with us.
We go there. The Drew Mariani Show on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Hey, you can support Relevant Radio in many ways. Joining a giving society, donating a vehicle you don't need anymore, or donating a piece of land or other real estate. Donate now at relevantradio.com/property.
Okay, I don't understand. Only God can forgive you. You just forgave me. You are God. But you are a different God than the one I have studied about. This is not Allah. So who are you that forgives me and I feel forgiven today? And he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
It's the Drew Mariani Show on Relevant Radio.
Again, a powerful testimony of a former Hezbollah leader who encountered Christ and converted. And we're talking a little bit about this throughout the day. There are very credible sources that are talking about how Muslims are being led to Jesus Christ. He's coming to them in dreams. He's coming to them in appearances. He's dressed in white. He's telling them to read the Bible. Many are converting to the faith. And the conversions are profound. And God is constantly reaching out to us. You know, it doesn't have to be in a dramatic fashion. Professor Roy Schoeman had quite an amazing story. He's my guest today. If you want to read one of those, he actually had a beautiful encounter with the Mother of God. You can go ahead and check out his story. Salvation is from thejews.com. Check out his YouTube channel as well. And feel free to go back and listen to anything you missed. We've talked a lot about this phenomenon of Christ coming at this time with increasing number and reaching out to countless souls. Professor, it's good to have you back. Before we jump to the phones, I want to follow up just on Israel. You know, they've been an anointed nation, God's chosen people. We've seen the protection over this nation across the centuries. They've been a persecuted people as well. I have a friend who's very close to some mystics, and he often says, Drew, keep your eyes on the Middle East, keep your eyes on Israel. That's where it's going to begin. I don't really know what that means, but I'd like your perspective on that. What role do they play, both in the end times or in events that are now unfolding?
Well, I left my crystal ball in the other room, but and I'm always a little I don't know how to put shy about, sounding like a crystal ball, but anyone who's interested in that should look at Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, and Psalm 83, because they paint a very consistent picture. And when you see that picture, and when you see what's happening now, I leave it up to the reader of those passages to just, to think about whether that's what we're seeing now. But the picture that both of those prophecies paint is, without any exaggeration, the following: that the Jews will be dispersed throughout the world from Israel. Remember, this is written before Christ. This is the Old Testament. Jews will be dispersed throughout the world. The land of Israel will become a waste, will become barren and empty. The Jews will return from around the world. They will think they're living in peace and security. And then nations, this is the war of Gog and Magog, nations from a large region will attack them. And that region is named, and that region basically encompasses Iran, southern Russia, Sudan, Libya, and Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, and I believe also Ethiopia. They will be attacked by all these nations. It'll look like the end for them. God will, quote, fight for Israel and defeat them. And then, this is really sweet, and then the attackers will know that I am the Lord, that the true God is the true God. So that suggests the conversion of the Muslim world by their miraculous defeat by Israel. I'm just saying this is what those chapters say. I'm not saying that I think that's what's going on. And then there's a very beautiful passage that says, and the Jews who had been unfaithful to God and has followed false gods, will also get reconverted to God. And then it closes with God saying, and I will reveal my face to them. I will show my face to them, which to me means he will reveal that he's Jesus Christ.
Wow. Amazing times. Well, it'll be amazing to see that unfold. It'll be pretty unpleasant between here and there. Yeah, no kidding. And who knows what that time is? Again, I mean, we could be living in it. It could be a millennia away. We don't know, right? Absolutely. We don't know the day or the hour. That's the great mystery of life.
The last line of Ezekiel, I think it's 39, says, "And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the eyes of many nations, and then they will know that I am the Lord." So it's got this, beautiful, happy ending. And with respect to the Jews, he says, "And I will not hide my face from them anymore," which suggests that we know from Romans 11, actually, that God is hiding his face from the Jews until the time for their conversion. What's it say? It says, I just don't have it on top of my head, but essentially that I will give them a spirit of stupor, eyes that should not see and ears that should not hear, so that the blindness of the Jews is in fact also part of this unfolding of salvation history. But then after this great battle, I will not hide my face from them anymore. So anyway, take it for what it's worth, but it's really, really stimulating to think about.
I've got to hold it right there. My gratitude